right, let's get started with your second CSS positioning activity. So this is going to be a little bit more of a walkthrough with some code examples because at this point in the semester, I'm expecting you to be able to do a lot of this on your own. And it is going to be challenging, but just remember, we're pretty far into the semester and you know everything you need to know to be able to do this. So have confidence in yourself, you can do it. First things first, you're going to want to practice. So pause this video and do the CSS grid garden. You may have done this earlier in the semester, so you can skip it if you want, or you can do it again. However, you do have to submit a screenshot, so hopefully if you've done it before, it remembers. My computer actually doesn't remember that I've done it before, so in that case, I would have to do them again. Oh wait, no it does. Ha! See, it does. It remembers that I did it. So I could just take a screenshot of this and be done. But if you want the refresher, and you might, then feel free to do it again. You also have this guide to CSS that you can keep open to reference. And then once you've done your practice, we can go ahead and get started. So again, pause this video, go do that, and then come back. All right, grid alignment. So you might want to watch these couple short videos before completing the next section. They're 4 minutes each, pretty short. So again, pause this video, go watch those and come back. And then we're going to review some vocabulary. So there's a few terms that you should learn to help make sense of alignment with CSS Grid. Justify content. That aligns the grid container along the inline axis, by default horizontal. This only works when the grid is narrower than the space available. Justify items. This aligns the grid item content along the inline axis, by default, again, horizontal. And this only works when the contents of a grid cell are narrower than the grid cell. Okay, align content. This aligns the grid container along the block axis, which is by default vertical. And this only works when the grid is shorter than the space available. Align items aligns the grid items contents along the block axis, which again is vertical by default. This only works when the contents of a grid cell are shorter than the grid cell. So just to review, justify aligns horizontal by default, and align takes care of other directions, so vertical. If we want to align the grid container, we use the content suffix. If we want to align the contents of the grid items within the grid cells, we use items. So I hope that makes sense. So content is the grid as a whole, the container, and then items is everything within that grid. And again, this article up here is really great to reference if you need a visual or are struggling. Okay, so now we're going to open up CodePen. So this is what it looks like. I've switched my view. You can click change view up here and you can have it at the bottom, which is usually what it does by default, or the left or the right. I prefer this view, so that's how I'm going to be working. Okay, and so you should see 3 sets of 4 boxes. The boxes have already been positioned into a square using CSS Grid. There are some differences between them, however. If you look at the Content 1 class, you will see that the rows and columns have been sized using 1FR. So the grid will use up all space available in the grid container. And we will end up with 2 equal columns and 2 equal rows. If we look in the browser development tools at the actual grid, we see this. So let's go do that real fast. So first, let's make sure that we see all 4 of them. We can do that. And then it mentions content 1. Also, we have no JavaScript, so I'm just going to collapse that entirely. So here's our class of content 1. So we can see right here, this whole box is content 1, and it has the red, green, yellow, and blue. And then if we look in the CSS, we can see that we have content 1 right here. I'm going to move my face real fast. We have content 1, and yes, we can see that the columns and the rows are by 1FR. And then it talked about the browser development tools as well. So let's take a look. And so wish my screen was a little bigger here. But here, when we see the content, you can see those grid lines right where my face is. My face always getting in the way. Okay, see those grid lines there? So you can see those 4 grid lines. That's one thing I really like about the inspector, is that you can see where the lines are on your grid. Makes it working with grid much easier. Okay, so let's go back over. So it says, let's try centering the grid and grid items. Add the following to content 1. So we're going to justify the content to center and align the content to center. So let's try that. Oop. Man, I can't type. Right? Is that what it said to do? Sorry. Justify content to center and align content to center. Sorry, my cat's coming to visit. All right, so we did that and nothing happened, right? We noticed that. So remember, the content refers to aligning the grid container. The grid container is completely filling the parent element. And so if something is as big as the parent, then it's technically already centered. It can't move. So now we're going to add these lines, justify items and align items. So remember, when we use items, we are centering the things inside the grid container. So justify items, center, and then, oh, and you can see, remember the justify is that horizontal axis, and then align is the vertical. So now, yep, now they're centering along that vertical axis with a line. So, yep, just like I said, we watched them align themselves horizontally first with justify and then vertically with align. So the next example uses rows and columns of a fixed size, 150 pixels to be exact. This time the contents of the grid is the same size as the grid cell, but the grid itself is smaller than the space it has available. So here's a picture of the grid lines. So you can see, so before we had, here was the entire grid, and the box inside it did not take up the full space, right? But here we have this entire thing is a grid, and the boxes are taking up the entire space within the grid. Make sense? So this time we attempt to align the items. This time if we attempt to align the items, nothing will happen. Because again, it's filling up that entire space. So technically it's already centered because there's no other space for it. So now we're going to add the following properties to content 2, justify items and align items. So let's try that. I'm just going to copy and paste. Okay, nothing happened, right? However, we can align the grid container. So we're going to add these one at a time, justify content, and then align content. So I'll just type it. Justify content, center. See how, again, on that horizontal axis, it just centered it. Because again, this is our grid. And unlike this one, it wasn't taking up the entire space, so it could center itself along that horizontal line. And now we're going to center on the vertical line, the vertical axis. So now we're going to say align content center. And now see, it centered itself there too. Perfect. So now here's our last example. So for the content 3 grid, we have the grid container smaller than the parent, and the grid items are smaller than the grid cell. My cats are being silly. Sorry. Okay, so again, just to illustrate, last time, the last 2 times, we had this grid took up the entire container it was in. This entire, white box with the black border. took up that entire space. And this one, we can see just like as the previous example, here's that that box, and it's only taking up this much space. The blue line is how much space it's taking. And then just like the first example, here are our grid containers, and they're not taking up the entire space even within the grid item or the grid container pieces. So that's that example that we're working on. So now when we add these 4 lines, something will happen as we add each rule. So let's do that one at a time and watch that happen. So here we have content 3. Let's start with justify items. So again, this is along the horizontal axis, and it's going to be centering the items within the grid. So each little box. Justify items, center. Whoop. So you see that they just within their grid, you can imagine the grid right here. It just centered itself. And then we will align items, center. And so now, yep, there we go. Now it should be centered both ways, both horizontally and vertically within its container. And now we're going to align the container itself within its parent. So we are going to use justify content and align content. So justify content center. Let's wait for that. There we go. Centers horizontally, and then align content center, and now it'll go vertically. So there we go. So those are your 3 examples. Okay, now there are other ways to align. So earlier in the semester, you were introduced to the concept of block and inline elements. Blocks flow vertically down the page by default, and inline flows horizontally across. You were also shown how to align both inline and block elements. So let's review that again now. For this part of the activity, your mind might jump to grid as a way to solve this. You could actually do it with grid, but in this case, we're going to try something different. You will not need a grid for this part. Since we're not using grid, the alignment properties we studied above, which is the justify items, content, align items, and align content, they're not going to work. They only work with grid. So block elements first. Block elements take up 100% of the width available to them. So if we want to align them, we first have to set a width of less than 100% on them. Then we can set the left and right margin to auto. For center, we should set both left and right to auto, so margin 0 auto. The 0 centers the left and right first, or the top and bottom first, sorry, and then the auto is the left and right. For right aligned blocks, we would set just the left margin to auto. So margin left is set to auto, just like that. And then blocks are aligned by default, so we don't have to do anything to that. So we're going to use this CodePen for practice. Let's open another CodePen. And let's look at the screenshot. So this is what we're trying to do. And this is what it looks like right now. So it looks pretty different, and you know, all of the boxes are just right on top of each other, and the sentences are all aligned the same way, which is really different from this. Like here I can see that this box is like over there, and that one's in the center, and that one's on the left, or on the right, sorry, and then that one's in the center, and then even within the paragraphs they have all different things. So it looks like the first sentence here is left aligned, and then center, then right aligned. This one follows that, this one follows that, and then this one's opposite. This one goes right aligned, center, left, left. So the alignment of the poem can be described like this. So the block 1 should be left aligned, block 2 center, block 3 right, block 4 center. The first paragraph in blocks 1, 2, and 3 should be left aligned. The second paragraphs in block 1, 2, 3 should be center aligned. And the third paragraph in the blocks 1, 2, and 3 should be right aligned. the first paragraph in block 4 should be right aligned. The second paragraph in block 4 should be center aligned. The third and fourth paragraphs in block 4 should be left aligned. Okay, sounds about right. Now, all of these blocks are made of section elements. Remember that if we want to align a block element, blocks or sections are block elements, we need to set a width, then adjust the margins. Set a width of 50% on all these section elements. So let's take a look. Here's our blocks, and if we look through, again, I'm going to get rid of that JavaScript since we're not using it. And I'm going to look for the sections. Okay, so here's our section, and it said to give each section a width of 50%. This has already been done for us. Okay, then set the alignment of each block by adjusting the margins appropriately. And next we need to align the paragraphs. So again, guys, I walked you through all of the examples in this one. However, in this one, you're going to need to do that all on your own. So you're going to need to align elements of the block by their margins appropriately. So consider how that is done. And again, we talked about the example up here. So if you're kind of struggling for that, play around with these code samples and see what it does to each block, okay? And then by the end, you should at least have your blocks looking like this. The text inside of them will not be aligned properly, but the blocks with the borders should look like this. Okay? So go ahead and do that. And then next we need to align the paragraphs. So we need to use the text align property to align text inside of the paragraphs. So we set the text align property on a block like P or H1, for example, and it will affect everything inside of that block. So we should add a class to each paragraph and change them that way. Or we could add a class to each paragraph and change them that way, but that would be a lot of extra typing, and there's another way to do it. We could take advantage of complex selectors, specifically nth of type pseudo selector. So nth of type counts the number of times a paragraph or particular element is the child of another element. Here's an example. So we have paragraph nth of type 1 is the first paragraph, paragraph nth of type 2 is the second paragraph, and P nth of type 3 is the third paragraph. So using those selectors, write the CSS that will format the text according to those requirements above. Note that that block 4 is formatted differently than the others. For those paragraphs, we will need to be more specific. Target just blocks that are in the block 4 element. We can use this using descendant selectors. So here's a link for you to read more about those. And let's see, we used some of those when we styled the menu for our dry or site plan. So you can review the finishing or the final touches activity from week 7 if you're feeling a little rusty on that or you can't remember. Lastly, you're going to take a screenshot and submit. So take a screenshot of all the activities that you've done. So for a reminder of the activities that you should have done, you should have done the CSS grid garden. I'm expecting to see a screenshot of your last level completed. I'm expecting to see a screenshot of all 3 of these working. And then I'm expecting to see a screenshot of this working. I am going to show you real fast one example in this. I'm not going to leave you totally hanging. But for the most part, I am expecting you to do that part on your own. Okay, so yeah, again, so just students completed that assignment as outlined above. So I need to see those screenshots to know that you've done that. And again, you may need to adjust the width of your browser window once you're done so that they look correctly. So I want to just show you an example real fast of P nth of type. So let's just copy that. And now if I put P nth of type here and I say color red, we're going to see here the first paragraph turning red. Now I probably don't want this paragraph turning red, so we're going to use descendant selectors and use section P nth of type 1. And now if I wanted to do the same thing, and then remember, you're not doing colors like I'm doing, you need to align them, but I'm just kind of trying to show you how this property works. And now you can align the paragraphs on your own. Oop, that's not what I meant to do. 2. Now the second one will be blue, and the first one's red. And now this one is green. Oop, I meant to do 3. Okay, so now they're all looking like that, but again, you know, remember this one is going to be a little different. So to do that, we're going to do something like, we're going to use descendant selectors again. And, okay, so where does this one start? Section with the class of block 4. And let's say we want that one to be, well, let's just do the opposite. Green. And then let's do this one purple. And then we'll make this one red. Okay, so did you see how with nth of type I was able to style all of these the same, and then I used just a little bit more specific descendant selectors to get the block 4 so that they could be different. Okay, so that's basically exactly what you need to do. You just need to do text alignment instead. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm looking forward to seeing your screenshots and watching you guys stretch yourself. You guys are doing really awesome work, and I'm always impressed.